Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Prime Minister, his Treasurer, his Finance Minister failed 8 times to tell the Australian people the total cost of corporate tax cuts over 10 years from July the 1st this year, both legislated and proposed to be legislated by this government. Given that the Prime Minister has now had 24 hours to confirm the facts, I repeat, what is the total cost of corporate tax cuts over 10 years from the 1st of July 2018, both legislated and proposed to be legislated?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. This is the deliverer of roll gold guarantees. Roll gold guarantees. He is a guarantee deliverer of Olympic proportions. He gave a roll gold guarantee that all of his members, including the ones that have just resigned, were eligible to sit in the House. And he did so after the High Court had made it abundantly clear last year that they were not eligible. Oh yes, he did. He kept on saying they were fine, and of course he was backed up by that booming advocate, the member for Isaacs. A reminder, Mr Speaker, of the great wisdom of the late Neville Wran when he said anyone can go to jail if they get the right lawyer. Mr Speaker, the roll gold guarantees.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order. Members on my right, the Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, on direct relevance, the question was very specific. If the Prime Minister wants to talk about what the High Court will so hold, he can do so in answer to a Dixer.
Just before I call the Prime Minister, members on both sides, that is a reasonable point of order. I allowed the Prime Minister some latitude, and I was sure he was going to come straight to the substance of the question. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, you're absolutely right. I'm coming straight to the substance of the question, and the substance of the question is tax. And the substance of the question is the $200 billion of tax, more than $200 billion, the Leader of the Opposition is proposing to impose on the Australian economy. The reality is, when it comes to company tax, we have the Leader of the Opposition himself stood right here during the Labor government and said reducing company tax increases investment, improves productivity, increases employment and results in better wages. Said all of that, and he said it again and again and again. And you know what? He was right. Because the reality, however, is you cannot trust the Leader of the Opposition, whether he's giving a roll gold guarantee or just a sort of a silver-plated guarantee. None of his undertakings can be trusted, whether it's to the workers at Clean Event, whether it's to Kevin Rudd or Julia Gillard.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point. Members will cease interjecting. I want to hear from the members on my left.
Didn't know he could read.
The member for Fisher is warned. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
On a point of order, Mr Speaker, you gave an earlier ruling and the Prime Minister is now defying that ruling.
I say to the Manager of Opposition Business, I'll be the judge of whether anyone's defying the ruling. The Prime Minister, I don't need the Leader of the House. His interjections are regular, but they're not persuasive. The Prime Minister is speaking about company tax or corporate tax, and he's comparing and contrasting. And if I feel at any point that the Prime Minister or any other minister, for that matter, is ignoring my rulings, I'm more than capable of taking action. The Prime Minister knows the question was about company tax. He's been talking about company tax and comparing and contrasting, and I'm listening very closely to his answer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As we've said before, the medium-term cost of the unlegislated component of the enterprise tax plan, which is currently before the Senate, is $35.6 billion over the period from 2016-17 to 27-28. Now, if the Leader of the Opposition wants to do some figuring and analysis of what it would cost the Australian economy to repeal the tax relief already granted to small and medium businesses, family-owned businesses, well then he can do that himself, because he's got to front up and tell Australian businesses and their employees the price they would pay in lost investment and lost jobs from a Shorten government.
The member for Goldstein.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on how the government is building a stronger economy with lower taxes and more jobs for Australian workers? And is he aware of alternative approaches?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Member for his question. Mr Speaker, the government is committed to ensuring that the Australian economy is strong, because we know everything depends on a strong economy. It means we can guarantee the essential services Australians rely on. It means we can properly fund our hospitals and our schools with record funding. It means we can guarantee Medicare in legislation and make medicines like Kisqali, a breakthrough breast cancer treatment, more affordable. And I'm pleased to say, Mr Speaker, that on the subject of new medicines, the government is currently listing a new medicine a day on the PBS, slashing the price of medicines by thousands of dollars, and that's making a huge difference to Australians in need, and we're able to support them in that way because we have a strong economy. It means we can deliver an ageing package that gives older Australians real choice to stay in their home for longer or go into the workforce. It means we can fully fund the National Disability Insurance schemes, cut the cost of childcare for mums and dads, properly fund the AFP and the other security agencies so they can keep Australians safe. And it means we can afford to build the congestion-busting infrastructure, the road and the rail, that will ensure Australians get home to their families safer and sooner. And none of that is possible without a strong economy. It enables all of this and more. A strong economy means businesses are investing and creating jobs, and on that front, Mr Speaker, we know that last year Australians created more jobs than in any calendar year in our history. 415,000, 1,000 jobs a day are being added, Mr Speaker. That shows what a strong economy delivers. A strong economy means more jobs, and it enables us to have lower taxes for Australians. It means, Mr Speaker, as the economy continues to strengthen, Australians will benefit from tax relief that prioritises middle and lower income earners. From next year, a worker on an average income will be $530 a year better off. That's a quarterly electricity bill, the kids' school books, or 5 or 6 trips to the petrol station. Mr Speaker, what that does is give real support to families on average middle incomes and lower incomes, Mr Speaker. Real relief, real support for Australian workers. It's their money, they've earned it, and they deserve to keep more of it. Labor will put all of this at risk because at the end of the day, the Labor Party does not believe that those hard-earned dollars belong to the people that earn them. They believe the government's entitled to them. We don't. They're Australian.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Given the Treasurer has now had 24 hours to confirm the answer, I ask, what is the total cost of the corporate tax cuts over 10 years from 1 July this year, both legislated and proposed to be legislated by the government?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. And the answer is as I gave yesterday, Mr Speaker. The unlegislated tax plan that the member refers to, the cost of that is $35.6 billion over the period from 16-17 to 27-28. So that is 10 years from the 1st of July to 27-28, Mr Speaker. Now, what he does, the 1st of July 2018 to 27-28, it's 10 years. You can count them up. You've got 10 fingers. Off you go. Mr Speaker, What the Labor Party wants to know is what is the cost of increasing tax on small business. Now, we don't have a policy to increase tax on small and medium-sized businesses up to $50 million. I don't have such a policy. The Prime Minister doesn't have a policy. The only people who have a policy to increase taxes on small and medium businesses is the Labor Party. So if that's their policy, Mr Speaker, they should tell Australians what it costs, because we don't have such a policy. It's their policy to increase taxes on small and medium-sized businesses. So the Shadow Treasurer should be talking to the 3.3 million businesses out there that have a turnover of less than $50 million, and he should say to the 7.2 million Australians who work for those businesses, why are you putting up the taxes on those businesses? That's your policy. You cost it. Do your own work. We're getting on with the job of putting more than 1,000 people in work every single day under the policies of this government, Mr Speaker. So it's up to them to do their own work. But, Mr Speaker, whatever they promise tonight from the Leader of the Opposition, whatever rolled gold promises he makes to the Australian people, we know, Mr Speaker, that no one can trust the rolled gold promises of the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker. Even those on his own side of politics can't trust the rolled gold promises of the Leader of the Opposition. The workers he used to represent when he used to bargain away their penalty rates, Mr Speaker, they couldn't trust the rolled gold promises of the Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition is shifty
The
as.
Treasurer will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
You know, the Treasurer makes a mockery of doing personal explanations. We've dealt with that matter. He knows better.
The member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how the budget is responsibly delivering a stronger economy and lower taxes for Australians? Wow. Is the Treasurer aware of any support for this plan, of course apart from my own?
The Treasurer has the call.
I thank the member for North Sydney for his question, and I thank him for his support for the government's budget, as I thank all of my colleagues for their support for the budget, and as I thank the Australian people, Mr Speaker, who know 10 million of them who will be getting tax relief under this budget, Mr Speaker, the small businesses that will be getting tax relief, Mr Speaker, not just from the budgets passed, but the extension of the instant asset write-off for small businesses for a further year, Mr Speaker. But our budget invests in a stronger economy. We have a tax plan for a stronger economy. The Labor Party has a tax plan for a weaker economy. And only a tax plan for a stronger economy, one that actually creates jobs, one that actually rewards investment and rewards effort and people putting in the hard yards, Mr Speaker. That's what produces a stronger economy. We're investing in the key infrastructure. We're investing in science and technology to boost how business can perform, including farmers and the access to additional markets through our export trade deals. We're investing in new industries. We are investing in a stronger economy. And that is being done at the same time as keeping our spending under control, real growth and expenditure of 1.6% over the entire term of this coalition government. Real spending growth is less than 2%, which is at the lowest level of any government in more than 50 years. And on top of that, we're getting spending under control by bringing it down as a share of the economy to less than the long-run average, to 24.7%. And we're keeping taxes under control with a clear tax speed limit, because on this side of the House, in the Liberal and National parties, we know that too much tax is too much tax. On the Labor Party side, Mr Speaker, too much tax is never enough for the Labor Party, Mr Speaker. It's never enough because they cannot control themselves when it comes to spending. And that's why in this budget that we've handed down, which has turned the corner on debt, S&P, the ratings agency, has said the government has shown a commitment to fiscal prudence with its plan to return a budget balance earlier than previously announced. These developments have helped ease the negative pressures on Australian sovereign rating. Moody's have said the budget is a positive step in improving the fiscal outlook. The outlook is underpinned by solid economic growth. This improved outlook for both net and gross debt is positive. And as you go around and you speak to the economists, Mr Speaker, I can't help but be drawn to Mr Koukoulas, who is well known to those on the other side of the House. He says the budget is framed on a series of realistic and reasonably conservative economic forecasts for economic growth, wages and company profits. Saul Eslake says the economic growth forecasts were reasonable. Adam Boynton points out that the numbers look conservative to us. Michael Blythe from the CBA has said, frankly, it's hard to quibble with the budget assumptions. And Alan Oster has said, notably, the government is more conservative than the Reserve Bank of Australia. This budget delivers for all Australians.
Time has concluded. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. This morning, the Australian newspaper reports economist Saul Eslake said the total cost of corporate tax cuts over 10 years from the 1st of July this year, both legislated and proposed to be legislated by this government, could be even higher than $80 billion. Is he right?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for a question. Mr Speaker, I've addressed this question of the medium-term costs of corporate tax relief. But let me ask this question. The real question is, what is the cost to the Australian economy of an uncompetitive tax rate? What is the cost? Well, the member for McMahon wrote a book saying that Australia's company tax rate had to be competitive. Mr Speaker, if Australia's company tax rate stays at 30% for most companies, for the larger companies over $50 million in turnover, if it stays there, by 2020 there will be only one country in the OECD with a higher company tax rate, and that is Portugal. Now, Mr Speaker, it is a competitive world. But I have to say, Mr Speaker, when Australian companies are looking for capital, they don't normally see themselves as only competing with Portugal. They want to compete with the whole world. And we are in a position where France is going down to 25%. The US, obviously the largest economy, has gone to 21%. The UK is below 20%. The reality is, as Labor leaders and shadow treasurers and treasurers have acknowledged year in, year out, until this leader, whose roll gold guarantees can never be trusted on any subject, whether it's citizenship or company tax or backing in the workers he's supposed to represent, when this leader changed all of the commitment over many years that you saw from the Labor Party, which recognised that Australia had to be competitive internationally. He's abandoned that, and when you abandon international competitiveness, whether you abandon it on tax, whether you abandon it on free trade, you are abandoning Australian workers and their jobs.
The member for Melbourne has the call.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Australia has a proud history of egalitarianism, and we can look after everyone in our community because of our progressive tax system, where people who earn more pay a higher rate of tax. But your new flat tax plan is the end of progressive taxation in this country. How is it fair that someone earning $200,000 a year pays the same rate of tax as someone who is just above the minimum wage? Why do you want to be the Prime Minister that killed egalitarianism?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you. I want to thank the honourable member for his question, Mr Speaker, because it gives me the opportunity to remind the honourable member that at the end of the 7-year personal income tax reform plan that we are setting out, it's been set out in the budget, it's been introduced into the House in legislation by the Treasurer, at the end of it, where 94% of Australians will not have to pay more than 32.5 cents for any additional dollar they earn. So the marginal tax rate, which he's objecting to, yes, he doesn't like it, from $41,000 up to $200,000 will be 32.5 cents. This is the outcome. At that time, someone on $205,000 taxable income, earning 5 times as much as someone on $41,000 taxable income, will pay 13 times as much tax. And that is the whole point. The tax system remains thoroughly progressive in the sense that the bulk of the tax is paid by people on higher incomes. It remains the bulk of the tax, as it is now, will be paid by the few and not by the many. But what it will ensure is that constituents in his electorate and every electorate in this House who want to earn more, who want to get ahead, who want to do some more hours, who want to take on another promotion or start a business will know that they will not be put off that or disincentivised by higher and higher marginal tax rates. It is an outstanding reform, and it speaks to the optimism, the confidence and the aspiration that underpins the strength of the Australian economy. We know what makes the Australian economy strong. It's the optimism, the investment, the confidence of Australians, of Australian businesses in particular, and we are backing them.
The member for Canning.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how the government is continuing to deliver responsible budget management? How is the government guaranteeing essential services for all Australians?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Canning for his question, because he's part of a government that is committed and is delivering, keeping spending under control and keeping taxes under control. We've handed down a budget which sees net debt fall by $30 billion over the next 4 years. We have turned the corner on debt. It has taken us 5 years to wind back the reckless spending of the Labor Party and to turn the debt ship around, and to ensure that from this point we are reducing net debt in this country by $30 billion over the next 4 years and more than $230 billion over the next 10 years. And we do that simply by living within our means. The government lives within its means, just like all Australians live within their means. Australians know that the Labor Party have no idea how to live within their means, because every time they get in, they just wreck the joint, Mr Speaker. They just wreck the joint because they cannot live within their means. That's why they always put up taxes. They just keep jacking up the taxes because they don't know how to control expenditure. This is a government that is living within its means. 1.6% real growth in expenditure over the next 4 years, less than 2% since the time we came to government. Under the Labor Party, real growth in expenditure averaged at 4%, Mr Speaker, more than double what we are now doing as a government. Now, when you live within your means, when you provide for a stronger economy, it means you can do the things that guarantee the essential services that Australians rely on. And it's not the rolled gold guarantee of the Leader of Opposition. That's fool's gold, Mr Speaker. That's fool's gold if you're going to rely on the fake rolled gold guarantees of the Leader of the Opposition. Our guarantees are based on knowing that you need to create a strong economy to guarantee the essential services that Australians rely on. The National Disability Insurance Scheme, $1.4 billion for new affordable medicines under the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme. Record health funding of $34.4 billion, Mr Speaker. And our new hospitals agreement, $30 billion in additional funding for those hospitals which state and territory governments are signing up over the next 5 years all around the country. $24.5 billion in additional funding for our schools. That's 50% more per student on average, Mr Speaker. By guaranteeing our focus on building a stronger economy, that is what pays for everything. Now, those opposite the Labor Party, they just think the money falls from the sky. They must be so foolish to think they even can believe the rolled gold promises of the Leader of the Opposition. Well, the Australian people won't be fooled by this rolled gold failure, Mr Speaker, and this rolled gold fake. What we see in the Leader of the Opposition is a shifty character. He's shifty as.
The Leader of the Opposition has
my question is to the Prime Minister. For the last 2 days, the Prime Minister, the Treasurer, the Finance Minister have repeatedly refused to tell the Australian people the total cost of corporate tax cuts over 10 years from the specific date of 1 July this year, both legislated and proposed to be legislated by this government. Does the Prime Minister not know the answer, or is he too embarrassed by the fact that his corporate tax giveaway has simply blown out of control?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. I refer him to my earlier answer, and I note, Mr Speaker, that over the last several days, the Leader of the Opposition has failed to apologise for the rolled gold guarantee he gave that members who had been sitting in this House, who were plainly ineligible, were still sitting here. from the time of the High Court decision
Prime Minister
in
will
the
resume his
Canavan.
seat. The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. I have a ruling I'd like to make, if that's okay. I've been listening very carefully to the Prime Minister. I listened very carefully to the question, and whilst that is a topic of the day, the question did not relate to it, and the Prime Minister needs to address himself to the substance of the question. The member for Gilmore has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Will the Attorney update the House on whether the recent High Court judgment in the Gallagher case set a new test under the Section 44 of our Constitution?
The Attorney-General has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. And in fact, Mr Speaker, the best way to explain the recent High Court decision is to simply read directly what they said. At paragraph 21, the principal submission of the Commonwealth Attorney-General is that it is not enough for a candidate merely to have taken reasonable steps to renounce. And then at paragraph 22, the Attorney-General's primary submission is clearly correct. It reflects the law stated in Sykes and Cleary and re Canavan. Mr Speaker, the court was at pains to set out that this was not a new test, that it reflected the test previously set out in the 1992 precedent, and 10 times in the judgment the court explains how the Gallagher decision applies the same test as was set out only last year in the Canavan decision. So whose description should we accept as correct, the 7 judges of the High Court or the Leader of the Opposition? And sadly, Mr Speaker, the Opposition Leader's track record of being straight and correct on the citizenship issue is not very impressive. November last year, he was asked on the Today Show, "Can you guarantee no Labor members will be caught up in this?" Yes. Yes. A rolled gold guarantee. Yes, he said. But how did he get it so wrong, members? Was it shiftiness? Was it a propensity to say whatever he needs to get out of trouble at the time? Was it a willingness to deliberately mischaracterise the law in a cynical delaying tactic? No, members, it was the lawyer's fault. That's how it all went wrong. That's what our lawyers were saying to us. We followed the legal advice. And what we all want to know, Leader of the Opposition, is who was this team of crack counsel who were giving this remarkable legal advice? These legal Avengers, these legal eagles, who were they? Was the Shadow Attorney-General part of the crack team? I'm beginning to suspect not, because when the pivotal press conference happened, he was spookily absent or present with his invisibility coat on. So who were they? Who were the lawyers that actually read the Canavan decision and then provided advice to the Leader of the Opposition that she was a rolled gold sure thing to be found eligible? We need to know. It is now a matter of consumer protection, Mr Speaker. Our constituents need to know who not to go to for legal advice in the future. You can't trust him on the law, you can't trust him on the economy, you can't trust him on the budget. It is shifty, shifty, shifty.
Members on my right, the Manager of Opposition Business has the call. Member for McEwen is warned. The Manager of Opposition Business has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. My question's to the Treasurer. Given the Treasurer refuses to provide the updated costing of his corporate tax cuts, will he at least say whether it's higher than the figure he stated last year? Is it $80 billion? Is it below $100 billion or above $100 billion? Are we getting warmer? Does he know whether it's an odd number or an even number, or does he have a clue about a figure he could answer last year?
The Treasurer has the call.
I can assure the member opposite that when it comes to economic management, the Labor Party is as cold and as stone cold as they come. They have not got any warmer in opposition than they were in government. When they were in government, Mr Speaker, they recklessly spended. And you know, the thing about the Labor Party is this. When they're in government, it's always someone else's fault, despite the fact they had $150 a tonne iron ore prices and they had global growth running at high rates, Mr Speaker. It wasn't up to them that the revenue fell out. It was always someone else's fault. But when it was the Liberal Party and the National Party in government, back in 2007, the member for Lilly and others used to go, well, it's only going so well in the economy because they've all just got so lucky. Terribly, terribly, terribly lucky. And we've been hearing it from them again now when we're talking about the stronger economy that's been built under this government, and they're saying it's all about what's happening overseas. They're all just getting so terribly, terribly lucky again. Well, what I've noticed, Mr Speaker, is every time the Australian people vote Liberal and National, they get a lot luckier. The economy gets a lot luckier, Mr Speaker. So I've got one response. Vote Liberal and National and get lucky.
The member for Burke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. Will the Minister update the House on the government's commitment to renewing our defence capabilities? And, Minister, why is it important to have a consistent approach to the formulation of policy?
The Leader of the House has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Burke for his question about defence and defence industry. This budget, Mr Speaker, delivers the essential services that Australians rely on. We are protecting Australians through the Australian Defence Force, and that is one of the essential services the government provides. And this budget continues to support the ADF and confirms the $200 billion build-up of our military capability over the next 10 years, the largest build-up of that capability in our peacetime history, and we are using that heft to drive jobs and growth in the economy like never before, and that is showing up in the Performance of Manufacturing Index as recently as this month, which showed 19 months of continuous growth in manufacturing in Australia, the longest since 2005, and in March this year it was the highest expansion on record. So our defence industry investment, protecting Australia, guaranteeing the security of Australians, is also driving our economy, and that is a very good outcome. Consistency is the hallmark of this government's approach to government policy, Mr Speaker, and that has characterised this government for the last 5 years. But the approach of the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker, has been characterised by narcissistic self-interest throughout his entire political career. On this side, Mr Speaker, you get consistency of approach. On the Labor side, from the Leader of the Opposition, you have a narcissistic, self-interested approach. This has been manifested time and time again, Mr Speaker, and his caucus colleagues know it. That's why he has a Faustian pact with the CFMEU. I assume he gave them a rolled gold guarantee, Mr Speaker, a rolled gold guarantee to be their cat's paw in this parliament. He sold the clean event workers down the river, Mr Speaker. He sold the clean event workers down the river in order to get more power in the ALP. I assume he gave the clean event workers a rolled gold guarantee that he'd take care of them and put their interests first. And most recently, Mr Speaker, we've seen him sell down the river the 3 members of parliament who resigned today over their citizenship issues, because, Mr Speaker, he vastly overreached on the citizenship question. He could have, for the last 6 months, he's known that he has 3 members of parliament sitting in this House who are ineligible to be here. The Leader of the Opposition, because of his own narrow self-interest, has humiliated those 3 members of parliament, publicly humiliated them. I assume he gave them a rolled gold guarantee that he'd put their interests ahead of his own, but he didn't. That's the hallmark of this Leader of the Opposition. His caucus colleagues know it. They're starting to say it, Mr Speaker, and I'm afraid the Leader of the Opposition's political career is starting to have the smell of death about it.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware that on Sky News today, the CEO of the Grattan Institute said the government's income tax scheme includes, and I quote, a small tax cut for low-income earners and, I quote again, a very large tax cut for high-income earners? Can the Prime Minister detect a pattern here? Is this why the Prime Minister won't give a straight answer on the cost of his policies?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. All of the details of the impact of the personal income tax cuts on different levels of income and different households are all set out in the budget papers and accompanying documents, and it is very, very clear that the tax relief goes in the first instance to people on low and middle incomes, and subsequently it goes to the broad range of income earners, other than those, of course. The rate that is not affected is the 45% rate, and the threshold is lifted to $200,000 in 7 years' time. The 10-year cost has been given already by the Treasurer, but the point is that the income tax system remains, in terms of the distribution of the burden as it is today, where the largest share of the tax is paid by those on higher incomes, and I refer the honourable member to the answer I gave the member for Melbourne a moment ago.
The member for Hughes.
My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Will the minister update the House on the importance of strong and consistent border protection policies? And is the minister aware of any risks associated with alternative approaches?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the honourable member for his question. The government takes very seriously, as the Australian people do, the protection of our borders. We want to make sure that we can bring people to our country safely. We want to make sure that we can assess the risk when people are applying for a visa, whether they're coming here through the humanitarian and refugee program, whether they're coming here on a business or tourist visa. We want to make sure, Mr Speaker, we can do everything within our power to keep Australians safe. Now, it is a fact, and the Australian public remembers this very well, that when Labor was in government, they completely lost control of our borders. 800 boats arrived, 1,200 people tragically drowned at sea, and 50,000 people came through. 17 detention centres opened, Mr Speaker, thousands of children into detention, and we know now, as a result of the latest figures provided in the budget this week, that this disaster presided over by Labor has now cost us $16 billion, Mr Speaker. The Australian taxpayers, who are working hard, who are struggling to pay their energy bills at the moment, who are struggling to pay the bills associated with their household, have been ripped off by $16 billion thanks to the Labor Party. Now, you would have thought that that would have been enough, given that this government has restored integrity to our borders, given that we have stopped those boats. We've turned back 32 boats with 800 people on them over the course of the last couple of years. We've not had a death at sea, and we have security in our border system, Mr Speaker. You would have thought that the Labor Party may have learned something over the course of that period, but they haven't. They haven't. The Australian public heard the Leader of the Opposition say that he would adopt the coalition policy and that there would be no difference between the Liberal Party policy and the Labor Party policy, but as usual, he didn't tell the truth to the Australian public. This person, Mr Speaker, who aspires to be the leader of our country, has deceived workers in this country when they were ripped off, when he was bargaining on their behalf, and at the same time his union was accepting payments from the bosses. We know that his colleagues have been deceived and double-crossed by him over his entire working career. We know that he will say or do anything. What we do know, Mr Speaker, is he can never, ever be trusted. He can't go to this election saying that the Labor Party has the same policy as the coalition when it comes to border protection. He said that at the last election, and they have spent every day since crab-walking back from that position. There is now a majority of caucus members, Mr Speaker, who are opposed to Operation Sovereign Borders. This Leader of the Opposition couldn't lie straight in bed, and the Australian public well and truly know that by now, Mr Speaker.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. I referred to Grattan Institute modelling into the government's personal income tax scheme released a short time ago. Can the Treasurer confirm that $15 billion of the annual $25 billion cost of the government scheme will come from collecting less tax from the top 20% of income earners? Treasurer, how is this fair?
The Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, I thank the member for his question. I can confirm that in 2015-16, the let me restate that. In 2015-16, those on the top tax bracket paid 30.3% of all personal income tax collected, and under the government's plan, Treasury estimates that those on the top tax bracket will pay around 36% of all personal income tax collected in 24-25. As the Prime Minister was pointing out before, someone earning $205,000 will be earning 5 times more but paying 13 times more tax. 13 times more tax, Mr Speaker. So under this plan, the progressivity of our tax system is well protected and well respected. Mr Speaker, the problem with the Labor Party is they don't understand that this country was not built on envy and bitterness. And our tax system shouldn't be built on envy and bitterness either. Those opposite the Labor Party think that the only way that people on low and middle incomes can do better is if they make people on other incomes do worse. This is the flat earth thinking that chokes economies, Mr Speaker, and that's why the Labor Party cannot be trusted to run what will be, estimated over the next 4 years, a $2 trillion economy. I wouldn't trust the Leader of the Opposition with $2, Mr Speaker, and yet he walks around here thumping himself about on issues of rolled gold guarantees. Well, he might think he's the gold member of this parliament, Mr Speaker, but he is a rolled gold failure as a member of this parliament.
The member for Chisholm.
My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. Will the Deputy Prime Minister update the House on recent announcements of nation-building, job-creating infrastructure? Is the Deputy Prime Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Chisholm for her advocacy for nation-building infrastructure right across Australia. The Liberal and Nationals government is investing more than $75 billion, a record, through a 10-year infrastructure pipeline. Victorians will benefit from our commitment of $12.9 billion to key projects, including $5 billion for the Melbourne Airport Rail Link, linking the Tullamarine to the CBD, $235 billion towards North East Rail, $1.75 billion towards the Victorian North East Link, $475 million towards planning and pre-construction work for Monash Rail. We're investing everywhere, including a little further south in Tasmania, building on our prior commitments such as $400 million investment in the Midland Highway upgrade. This budget provided an additional $920.8 million to major projects in the Apple Isle, including $400 million under the Roads of Strategic Importance initiative to fund works including the Bass Highway, a further $59.8 million to deliver a second tranche of the Freight Rail Revitalisation Program, and the Scottsdale Irrigation Project, $25 million. I was there just the other day. Those farmers are delighted. Additional investment through programs such as Roads to Recovery, regional jobs and investment package have seen electorates such as Braddon, which has received millions of dollars in additional funding thanks to the Liberal Nationals federal government and indeed the state Liberal government. And indeed, this creates more job opportunity, it improves road safety. The Hodgman government welcomed the budget, saying it will boost our plan to take Tasmania to the next level. We believe in stronger regions. When our regions are strong, so too is our nation. When the Tasmania is strong, it makes for a stronger Australia. Liberal and Nationals government is the only one capable of delivering for all Australians in our cities and in our regions. But I'm also asked what stands opposed to our investment pipeline. And the Australian people know they cannot trust Labor, they cannot trust the Leader of the Opposition. I have to say, Mr Speaker, we mightn't be rolling out gold on our roads. We're certainly rolling out a lot of bitumen, Mr Speaker. He said he had a rolled gold process for pre-selections, and look what's happened today. Look what's happened. Labor's numbers are shortening by the day. The member for Maribyrnong's support is shortening by the day. He said he backed coal workers in Queensland. He said a complete different thing in the Batman by-election. What on earth will he say in the by-elections, by-election after by-election after by-election he now faces today?
He can't be trusted with citizenship, not with the government, and people know it. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, my question's to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that under his tax plan, a nurse who earns $50,000 will have the same marginal tax rate as a lawyer who earns $200,000 a year? And how is that fair?
Hear. The Prime Minister has the call.
The honourable member for his question. Under the revised tax scales at the end of the 7-year plan, the 45 cent threshold comes in at $200,000, so the marginal tax rate thereon is 45 cents in the dollar, plus, of course, the Medicare levy. So the 32.5 cent marginal rate goes from $41,000 to $200,000. And, Mr. Speaker, I can refer the honourable members to the Grattan report, which they've quoted earlier, and I just note that it states here once fully implemented, the personal income tax plan doesn't change the progressivity of the tax system much. Overall, those on high incomes will pay a similar proportion of total tax revenues with or without the plan.
The member for Fairfax.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Revenue and Financial Services. Will the Minister update the House on the action the government is taking to ensure Australians' superannuation is protected, including the superannuation of hard-working young Australians, such as those in my seat of Fairfax?
The Minister for Revenue and Financial Services.
I thank the member for Fairfax for his question, and I note the strong interest he takes in protecting the savings, the superannuation savings of his constituents, and I commend him for that. Mr Speaker, it is so critically important to make sure that those people in Australia who work hard and who save diligently for their retirement have their savings protected, and that is what the Turnbull government is focused on. We are seeing, though, that young people in particular have their superannuation accounts whittled away under excessive fees and charges. The current system also sees millions of Australians unable to take advantage of the impact of long-term compound savings because, of course, their savings have been spread across multiple accounts because they are unable, because of enterprise bargaining agreements and the like, to consolidate them. Of course, this must be fixed. The government, in our Protecting Your Super package, will defend the superannuation savings of millions of Australians by capping certain fees and by banning others. We are improving the insurance arrangements by stopping young Australians, those with low balances below $6,000, and those with inactive accounts being saddled with insurance that they don't need, can't claim on and didn't ask for. And we are protecting those Australians who have got forgotten accounts, the money that they have saved and set aside but they no longer have access to, by proactively reuniting those people with their money. Combined with our personal income tax plan announced in this budget, Australians, and young Australians in particular, will be tens of thousands of dollars better off throughout their working life and in their retirement. And it's not just us on this side that recognise that. Consumer advocates such as Choice, along with numerous other consumer groups, have backed our superannuation reforms. They have said billions will flow back to consumers, away from the bottom line of the big banks and the life insurers, and they've said for individuals it will mean tens of thousands of dollars more in their savings. Now, this is fair. This is fair. But tonight, the Leader of the Opposition has a real test of character. He has a chance to show the Australian people whether or not he actually believes in his rhetoric about fairness. He has to show tonight whether he is more than just talk or whether he will in fact back in these fair reforms. I suspect that he won't. And why won't he? because he was the chief architect of the mess that has been created and that we are fixing up when he was Minister for Financial Services and Superannuation. The Turnbull government will protect your money, they won't.
The member for Rankin. Members on my right. The member for Rankin has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why was the Prime Minister willing to separately legislate different stages of the government's corporate tax cuts, but is unwilling to do the same for tax cuts for low and middle income earners? Why is it always one rule for big business and another for low and middle income earners? Isn't the Prime Minister the only person standing in the way of tax cuts for ordinary Australians from 1 July?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, before I ask the Treasurer to complete this answer, I just say that the honourable member who just asked the question is not the only person standing in the way of tax cuts for hard-working Australians. It's the entire Parliamentary Labor Party.
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We put the whole enterprise tax plan to this parliament. We put that in this House of Representatives, and it was passed by this House. And we've done exactly the same thing here, Mr Speaker. And I say to the member, and if they give leave, we'll be happy to debate this bill right now, Mr Speaker. Why don't you give us leave and we'll pass it now, the whole thing. Come on, let's have the debate. Let's pass the bill. Shall I seek leave, Mr Speaker, to bring on that motion of business? We'll have that opportunity very shortly if they so desire, Mr Speaker. We gave them that opportunity the other day, and the Shadow Treasurer scurried under the table there, Mr Speaker, like the little rat he is, Mr Speaker. He got under there.
The Treasurer withdraw.
I withdraw, Mr Speaker. I withdraw. I would hate to offend the sensibilities of the member for McMahon, Mr Speaker. We know what a precious flower he is, Mr Speaker. We know what a petal he is. But, Mr Speaker, when it comes to this issue, I have a question for the Labor Party, and I know the answer, so it's rhetorical. They, Mr Speaker, do not want to act on bracket creep in this country. That's what they're saying. They've been shifty all week on this, as shifty as the Leader of the Opposition. They're hedging their bets. They're saying, oh, we'll support this, maybe we'll support that. The Australian people just want a straight answer from the Labor Party. Do you support lower taxes for all Australians? Simple question. Or are you just going to be stuck in your rut of envy and bitterness and want to punish Australians who are just working hard and seeking to get on, Mr Speaker? The Labor Party, when it comes to tax, are rolled gold failures, absolute rolled gold failures, and they're led by a rolled gold failure.
The member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Will the minister outline to the House how a stronger economy enables the government to subsidise life-changing medicine for over 3,000 breast cancer patients, including those in my electorate of Capricornia? Is the minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Health has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Capricornia. And you know, she's absolutely right. A strong economy is essential to provide the funding for record Medicare support. It's essential to record hospitals funding. It's essential to record mental health care funding. It's essential to record medical research funding. And it's essential to be able to ensure that Australians get the medicines that they are entitled to when the medical experts recommend that something should go onto the pharmaceutical benefit scheme. As the Prime Minister said, since we came to office, 1,500 new or amended listings on the PBS, one per day on average, $9 billion worth of new drugs on our watch in our time. And critically, just this morning, I met a woman from the Canberra area, Lisa Keogh. Lisa has advanced breast cancer and has been given access to a particular drug, Kisqali. Kisqali has not until now been on the PBS. It's a drug which would cost women $70,000 a year, beyond the reach of the vast majority of women in Australia. Now, as of the announcement made on budget night, 3,150 women in Australia as part of a $700 million listing, I'm advised the third largest listing by value in Australian history, will have access to Kisqali for advanced and metastatic breast cancer. What Lisa said to me was that this drug had changed her prospects from having months to years and years and possibly a full measure of life. That is what we do as a government. That is what a strong economy allows us to do. That is what allows us to deliver on compassion by providing real access to real medicines. And I was asked whether there are any alternatives. I did read the opposition say, but this is just the ordinary course of the business of government. Well, it's funny they say that, because under them it wasn't. They denied the new listing of drugs recommended by the medical experts. They rejected 7 medicines that were fundamental. Medicines for chronic pulmonary disorder, for asthma, for in vitro fertilisation and endometriosis, and for schizophrenia. And you ask, why would anybody do that? Well, again, I don't think they're evil. I just think they're incompetent. They are economic incompetence. They couldn't manage the economy then. They couldn't manage an economy now, and you wouldn't trust them to manage an economy in the future. And if you can't manage the economy, you can't manage health. It's as simple as that.
The member for Franklin has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. Before the budget, Australians were told the government would axe the cut to the energy supplement, announce 20,000 new home care places and invest billions more in aged care. Given none of this happened, hasn't the minister perpetuated a cruel hoax on older Australians?
Members on both sides. The Minister for Aged Care has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for her question. I would suggest that the member firstly read the portfolio budget statement in respect to pages 193. That identifies the growth over the forward years. It is a $5 billion investment. Now, when we consider, and let me go to another issue in this answer, a Roll Gold Treasurer had responsibility for setting the budgets in home care packages under the Living Longer, Living Better legislation. Had he looked at the Australian population pyramid, he would have made a different judgment in respect to the amount that was required. So the member for Lilley needed to take that into consideration. What we've done is we have invested in aged care to the tune of $5 billion. We've increased the number of residential care beds. We've increased the number in the forward years of home care places. We are providing programs and services to regional Australia that has a better outcome for people living in the bush. Our budget figures are accurate. They are not zero. I would suggest to the member for Franklin you read both my statement yesterday and the budget papers, because we are making a serious commitment to senior Australians in this nation across Commonwealth home programs, home care packages and residential care, plus those supporting measures which give them the quality of life that they deserve for the work that they have done for this nation. To scaremonger, to fearmonger and create angst in senior Australians is not appropriate. I have people who have now said they are not going into aged care because of the politicking that is occurring. Start to consider the needs of those who have the pathway into support services. But our budget measures are increasing. If you look at each year, we increase by approximately $1 billion per year, and over the last 4 years we've increased the budget by $1 billion to make up for the deficit that was there when we came into government from a Labor government. There is a need for us to focus on their needs and to ensure that they are given the opportunities. Now, our budget increases are into the forward years. They are real for this coming year. They are real for all elements of living. I hear the member for Burke chime in. Let me, the member for Watson. I'm taken by your name so often, Tony. So, Member for Watson, our figures that are set up in the budget are a reaction to the reality of what we need to provide for senior Australians. And each measure we've done, we've analysed the need, we have forward planned, and we are providing for the needs of Australians.
Concluded. The member for Fisher.
My question is to the Minister for Urban Infrastructure and Cities. Will the minister update the House on how the government is delivering on its record $75 billion investment into transport infrastructure in Queensland, including in my electorate of Fisher? How is the government's investment in the Bruce Highway contributing to Queensland's economic growth?
The Minister for Urban Infrastructure has the call.
Well, I do thank the member for Fisher, who's a very strong advocate for the infrastructure needs of his electorate as part of the fast-growing Sunshine Coast. And of course he's part of Team Queensland, the Liberal National Party team delivering outcomes for their state and their community. And of course the member for Fisher, together with the member for Fairfax, has recently had a huge win for his community, securing a $390 million commitment for the Beerburrum to Nambour rail project. Just one of the many wins that have been secured by Team Queensland, the LNP Team Queensland. $800 million for the Bruce Highway, Cooroy to Corra, Section D, the member for Wide Bay. A huge win. $500 million, 8 Mile Plains to Daisy Hill, the member for Ford and the member for Bonner. Huge wins. $500 million, Varsity Lakes to Tugun, the member for McPherson, a huge win, supported by other members of the Gold Coast Team LNP, the member for Moncrief, the member for Fadden. $497.3 million for the Mackay Ring Road, the member for Dawson, the Bruce Highway at Marumba Downs and Griffith, the member for Dixon, the member for Petrie. $390 million, of course, for Beerburrum to Nambour, an extremely important achievement for the members for Fisher and Fairfax. And indeed, so important is it that it was recently described in the Caboolture Herald as both quotes welcome and important. Now, of course, the person who gave that quote was a little bit forgetful. She forgot to mention that so far Queensland Labor has not yet put any money on the table for Beerburrum to Nambour, but we certainly hope they do so soon. But it's not surprising that she was a bit forgetful about that, because we know she's forgetful about a few other things as well. She forgot that she was a British citizen. And so now the person who gave that quote is now the ex-member for Longman. But it was good of her to recognise the extraordinary achievement of the members for Fisher and the members for Fairfax. The fact is, if you want infrastructure delivered in Queensland, you need to go to Team LNP. So I say to the people of Longman, you've got a great opportunity now. You can put somebody else into the LNP Team Queensland and deliver even more infrastructure for Queensland, just like the Team LNP is doing such a terrific job of doing.
The member for Franklin has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. I refer to his previous answer. Can the minister confirm that funding for residential and home care has been combined into a single line item in the budget? And given this single line item does not show anything close to the increase of $1.6 billion for aged care the government has claimed, isn't the minister perpetuating a cruel hoax on older Australians?
The minister has the call.
Why are you picking on vulnerable people?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for her question, and I certainly do. It's great to talk about the needs of older Australians. It's important that we talk about the way in which governments provide services, and it's important that we use the resources effectively to provide choice within the mix of the total budget that we allocate. And our allocation of budget goes to very critical programs. Now, in response to your question, we paid in residential care for beds occupied. We provide opportunities for home care packages that allow people to have choices to live at home. That, when you combine the efforts of this government, we are at least providing real choice that allows Australians to either live at home or make the choice to live in residential care. Now, in doing that, what we considered was the forward years in terms of the number of places required in both, that the number of residential beds required will continue to increase substantially. The number of home care packages will also increase in those out years. Our commitment is to making sure that across this nation, geographically and in capital cities, that we give absolute choices to people. And I want to identify resources that are best placed to give people that choice of home care or residential care. And in our budget, we have given attention to the needs of people with high-need places so that we give them the levels of support. And we continually wrap around other supports out of the programs that we have within the aged care portfolio. Because it makes no sense, yes, if you don't understand the term wraparound, it just means that we provide, Member for Lilley, services that will help people who have a need. If you don't understand that, then you need to come and see me and I'll explain it to you very, very simply. Because you didn't understand it when you were Treasurer. Because had you done that, we wouldn't have the challenges for senior Australians we have now. But I'm not going to blame Labor, because we are taking steps to make sure that we put into place measured initiatives that will look after senior Australians. And those commitments to that $5 billion budget, if you look through each of the initiatives, that $1.6 million, it is about providing a range of services, a range of choice, and giving them comfort, knowing that we have a government who is prepared to look after them, provide them with a range of services and meet their needs, unlike the scaremongering you're doing, Member for Franklin.
The Manager of Opposition Business seeking leave.
Mr Speaker, just quickly, I seek leave. In his answer, the minister referred specifically to page 193 of the portfolio budget statement as a $5 billion investment. I seek leave to table the relevant page, which is the table of contents on digital health.
The Manager of Opposition Business knows my previous rulings on parliamentary papers that are available. There's no need to. I'm not going to even allow him to seek leave, and I'll call the member for Leichhardt.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. My question is the Minister for Environment and Energy. Will the minister update the House on the government's investment in the Great Barrier Reef and how it is securing a stronger and more sustainable future for the reef and, of course, the Australian economy?
The Minister for the Environment and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Leichhardt for his question and acknowledge his strong advocacy for the Great Barrier Reef and for the jobs that it creates. He, like the member for Capricornia, like the member for Dawson and like the member for Flynn, are great advocates on this side of the parliament for the Barrier Reef, a resilient reef which creates thousands of jobs. Now, the Great Barrier Reef is a natural wonder of the world, and it went on the World Heritage List during the term of the coalition government, the Fraser government, and it supports some 64,000 jobs. 2 million visitors go to the reef each year, and it contributes more than $6 billion a year to the Australian economy. Now, the Turnbull government has announced the single largest investment in reef restoration and conservation in Australia's history. And I had the privilege, with the Minister for Foreign Affairs, to announce this $500 million commitment. Now, this $500 million commitment in the Barrier Reef was only possible because of the good economic management of the coalition. And the money will go towards working with farmers so that we can reduce the pesticide, the sediment and nitrogen runoff into the reef. It will go towards tackling the crown of thorns starfish, which has an insidious impact on the reef and has done enormous damage over the last 3 decades. and we will work with the scientists to ensure that our coral can be heat-resistant and light-resistant to withstand some of the challenges it faces. Now, our announcement has been welcomed by the Australian Marine Park tourism operators and their CEO, who said it underpins regional Queensland jobs and the economy. The Great Barrier Reef Foundation, which said that this was an unequal opportunity. The Mayor of Gladstone Regional Council, who said this was a fantastic announcement. The Chief Scientist of Australia, who said of the Coalition's announcement, it was an extraordinary day for science. So, Mr Speaker, while the Labor Party left the Coalition 5 dredge disposal projects that were planned for the Marine Park, and we banned them all and cancelled them all, and while under the Labor Party the reef went on the endangered watch list, we in turn have put in place a Reef 2050 plan with a $2 billion investment, and now made the single largest investment in Australia's history in reef conservation and protection. Protecting the environment is a Coalition legacy, and only under the Coalition will the reef continue to create the jobs that it does now.
The Minister's time has concluded. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the
thank the Prime Minister. Just before